All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and call this City of Newberry Commission workshop to order. We'll begin with an approval of the agenda as was advertised. I have a motion from Commissioner Barton, a second from Commissioner Hertzum. Any questions or comments on the agenda from the dais? Any questions or comments on the agenda from the audience? All those in favor of the agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. If we could have Commissioner Martin rise for the invocation, and please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
We bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you very much for this day. We come before you humbly. We ask for your guidance over our town. We ask for your guidance over these proceedings. May we be an example of you here on earth, worthy of the sacrifice of your Son. We appreciate everything that you've done for us. We ask your blessings over our families. We ask blessings over our children of the community as we get ready for the new school year. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right, our only agenda item is the fiscal year 2020 budget, governmental funds. And with that, we will turn it over to the city manager.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and City Commission. We are pleased tonight to present our governmental funds to you in a workshop format. Start off by just letting you know that you should have 4 documents that we'll be going through tonight. The first is the PowerPoint presentation, looks like this. The second is our budget worksheet, looks like this. It's a Excel spreadsheet, has multiple pages. Third is our capital improvement plan. It's a large worksheet, 11 by 17. And then the fourth document is called Property Tax Revenues, or is titled at the top, Property Tax Revenues. We'll be going through each of those tonight. We're going to start with the presentation. I guess, yeah, we'll start with the presentation. Dallas and I will share time as we go through it. Do we have the clicker? Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. As always, we'll just start with where we are in the budget process and the timeline. There's a typo on your printed PowerPoint, but we always recommend that you might give yourself a little wiggle room in the millage rate in case something happens between now and the budget hearings. And then in August, we have our third and final workshops, as well as the vote on the final fire assessment. And then obviously September is when we have our budget hearings. Tonight we're going to be talking about all of our governmental funds. As the Commission knows, the governmental funds include our general fund, which is the fund that accounts for most of the city's governmental operations. It includes things such as your law enforcement, fire protection, city manager, city clerk, city attorney, city commission, streets and roads, recreation, all those big departments. We do have a couple of special revenue funds. Those are funds that have been set up to specially account for certain types of revenue. The 2 that we currently have is one for Champions Park, so that money is kept aside specifically for Champions Park. And then the second one is for wild spaces and public places, so that money is kept specifically aside for those projects. We don't currently have any capital project funds or debt service funds. So those 3 funds will be the ones that we talk about tonight. We strive to develop a diversified and stable revenue system. The Commission's made several choices over the last several years to diversify our revenue system, which has really helped this year when we didn't have as big of an increase in property tax values as we might hope. And then of course in our budget, as you'll see tonight, the manager will talk about a lot that the manager is proposing a continuation budget with no large increases in service levels or changes in the budget. But in that continuation budget, we do have to take into account inflationary factors as well as changes in population. So while it's a continuation budget,
and for infrastructure, and if you'll recall a year or so ago, the commission made the decision to fund a significant water main extension out State Road 26. And that's not all of our accommodating the preliminary millage rate. We don't have a decision for next year's budget for law enforcement, but next year is the last year in our law enforcement contract, and so we're going to be making decisions very shortly in the next 6 to 8 weeks that are going to impact subsequent fiscal years. And so this year's budget could include some funding in anticipation of what might be coming. Capital improvement programs, and in that area we will continue to reinforce that the difference between renewal and replacement versus expansions or enhancements. We think that that the city as a whole, the city commission has a higher calling to renew and replace infrastructure in the manner in which we received it. So if you get a road that is paved.
That came out of wild spaces, almost all of it came out of wild spaces, public
Correct.
Places money. So it's not
Correct.
like we spent taxpayer, or our residents taxpayers.
That is correct.
Tax that was imposed, not imposed, but passed by the majority of other residents in other parts of the county. We're taking a share of that to pay for Canterbury.
That is correct. The vast majority, I think probably just the utility connection fees will not contract for elevated storage. But this continuation budget reflects.
Hang on 1 second, Mike. Commissioner Farnsworth.
I'm sorry.
Of that 12%, what is,
Was that it? Finish your question? Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
Nope, I'm on the wrong slide. So as the manager mentioned, we have a continuation budget, the manager's proposed budget for the general fund. In your two smaller special revenue funds, Champions Park and the surtax fund for wild spaces, there's not a lot to report there. The Champions Park fund is pretty much the same every year. And then the wild spaces fund, we're accounting for the revenues received from the half-cent sales tax. In your revenue diversification and revenue option, as always, the commission has the authority to impose a public service tax on all water sales within the city of Newberry.
Did y'all find out whether or not that has to be done within the budget cycle itself, or is that something that can be done at any time?
Mr. Mayor, the commission can adopt an assessment at any time. The part that ties it to a budget kind of cycle is whether the way you elect to collect those assessments. The city of Newberry that collects it.
Have to have the vote in the utility bills by this date in order to give the tax appraiser the information by this date. So we just need these kinds of calendar questions figured out ahead of time. Go ahead.
And to that point, Mr. Mayor, though, typically tax assessments are some sort of loan, whether it's commercial loan or whether it's a loan for from our reserve funds, and it's reimbursed. That loan is reimbursed
right.
through them, but as long as the commission is comfortable that it may be a 12-month period before we get the.
What I'm looking for, and what I'm assuming Commissioner Bard was looking for with that question was, a flyer piece of paper. So if a neighborhood comes,
Enough conversation out there for us to realize that it's important for us to kind of understand all the options. We're expecting to do some sort of a workshop just explaining all the tools that we understand that are available to a city and a city commission for consideration. And special assessments would certainly be one of the first.
They're going to be aimed at specific neighborhoods, is that the way I understand it?
no, I think you're misunderstanding.
Okay, because you said there are neighborhoods around.
Yeah, but I want to make sure we clarify, because that word aim means that this body right here is the one initiating. And a special assessment would happen if a neighborhood comes to this body and says, we want X, right? And then this body could say, well, one of a referendum in there that everyone would vote on. So I'd want to make sure, because it sounded like the way you're contextualizing that.
They had private roads, they had no hope, and it was an overwhelming majority. People were happy to do it. So I tend to agree that it would be something, it's an amenity that a neighborhood wants that they otherwise don't really have a shot at getting. And typically it is unless there's that public health concern in the case of the water system, typically the neighborhood gets to choose its own fate. Yeah, we really support that. Street lighting, it might be some neighborhoods. We want street lighting, and we have no chance of getting it unless we all agree to pay an extra $100 a year in taxes.
Yeah, I've been throwing out this concept when people come to ask, because to me, it puts the onus back on the neighborhood that's getting the benefit. And so instead of asking everybody in town to pay for something that only one neighborhood will enjoy, if the neighborhood truly wants it, then the neighborhood can come together and pay for it. And so far, I've not found anybody that's taken me up on that concept. Mr. New, continue.
Rate at 6.006 mils, which is 0.0007 more than the current rate. So staff went ahead and really made some executive decisions there and just kept the same millage rate. We forwent that extra $300 a year in taxes from going.
One way or the other, one may have said it, if we've got to pay for our. Oh.
Perfectly segueing into our millage rate caps is our millage rate caps. So on the screen you have all the different millage rate caps that are in effect for this year. On the worksheet that was provided to you, you have what those millage rates actually generate in terms.
Staff is recommending staying at 5,999.
The current budget is funded at 5,999.
That is correct.
Audience, every year when you're of the tax bill, so if your tax bill is $2,000, the city's going to receive about $500 of that. The rest, in majority, goes to the county and to the school board, with a little bit going to the library district and the water management district.
And Dallas, this graph, which you show us this every year, and it's a helpful way to kind of visualize it, but this just talks about millage rate, right? We're not, fees and assessments are not recognized in this.
Correct. It's just pure property taxes. A distribution of our residential taxable property values, just so the commission knows where most of our revenue comes from. About 600 of the 2,000 homes in Newberry are valued at less than $50,000 in taxable value, so they're generating very little taxable.
How many houses did you say was?
Just shy of 2,000.
And the question was how many houses were just shy of? Right, I got the question and the answer mixed up, but just getting it into the microphone.
Just shy of 2,000 houses in Newberry,
Okay.
according to the property appraiser. This, as you can see, the city of Newberry is fairly in the middle in terms of millage rates. We're pretty close to the pack with the unincorporated county and High Springs, and even, we're not close to Alachua. Alachua is a good mill ahead of us. Services that we as the city provide compared to the other cities in our area, including the unincorporated county. When I talk about the full cost of services, that includes law enforcement, fire, solid waste, electric, water, wastewater, and then obviously the cost of the government in general. Newberry is offering the best value for our cost. On average, it costs one of our residents $255 a month to live in Newberry and receive all of our services. And if you were in Gainesville, for example, that's closer to $300 a month, and even Hawthorne is at $312 a month, which I think shows that we're providing a lot of services at a very good value.
Dallas, do we have this graph printed off for people in the audience that may want to look at it?
So what's included in the proposed budget, starting with just personnel services?
2 Qs.
That's a good Scrabble word. As the commission knows, our loft local option fuel tax agreements have been renegotiated. This fiscal year 20 is the first year we'll see an increase based upon those agreements. This chart shows you the next 8 years in one past year of where we project our loft to go. It's a pretty conservative that are purchased throughout the state is either flat or decreasing. This year it was actually a decrease. A lot of it had to do with Hurricane Michael. However, the second nickel, the first nickel is the local option fuel tax. That is the darker portion on the
Before we advance from this slide, I'd also remind that 10-year interlocal agreement that was executed 2 years ago has a provision in it that this is reevaluated every, could go right back to where we had been for the last 30 years. Is that what you were gonna?
I wasn't gonna go there, but
Okay. I thought
it's a good update, yeah.
Okay. So I know that's supposed to come up. I'm just not quite sure when. The county manager mentioned that she wanted to start some dialogue about that.
We are being good watchdogs of that, though.
That's
and
correct.
Fairly constant communication with the county commission on it. And we still retain all of our ability to object if the county commission changes the distribution formula that they've already agreed to.
Go ahead. Let's see, did I miss the slide up? Just talk about the road resurfacing programs that the commission has put in place. We started that 3 years ago. The commission set an initial funding level at $100,000. We were able to fund projects at more than $100,000 annually just because we had reserves left over. This last project, which is the one you see at the low end of the slide deck there, is the one that's under construction right now, Southeast 5th and Southeast 7th. I think that pretty much annihilated all of those reserves. So moving forward, if we're going to use only local option fuel tax, we'll be limited to the revenues that we receive, or we would have to supplement that program with some other revenue source. This year's budget is programmed for $150,000 in road resurfacing and paving program, which is what we've understood is the next step that the commission would want to take. And I believe it is funded, again, just we haven't initiated a road improvement program, with the one caveat that we took advantage of the fact that we were resurfacing roads in the southwest section of town, and we are proposing to pave, we were authorized to pave, is it Southwest 4th Avenue? It's about a 400-foot stretch of road that's just adjacent to this project. We thought we got some good economic value out of that. So just looking at our unpaved road program, in the downtown area, we maintain almost 2 miles of unpaved road, and it wants the commission to be aware that we think that maybe half of those roads are grant eligible the next time we have a grant cycle available to us. It would save our taxpayers some money if we were able to obtain the grant and pave those roads, if it's the commission's will to pave those roads. Some other segments of those roads, like the one in Cedar Ridge, which is the one on the center right side, thank you. There are a bunch of undeveloped lots at that point, and so when we acquire those lots, what would be the necessary infrastructure improvements? There's no water system down there as well, so when we have those dialogues, we probably talked to 3 different developers about it. There needs to be a road improvement, road paving. Before we would issue building permits, we need to get the water system down there. So, and then a second conversation about unpaved roads or improving unpaved roads is in our rural area. We own $4.4 million. The staff believes that there will be development opportunities to improve those roads at some point.
Move your grader onto other pastures. So that's kind of the bar for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to have plenty of advance notice heading that way. So if we're approaching that with any of
I think to the tune of about, is it an additional $32,000 for funding in public works. That's for all roads, but we think the majority of that would be, well, maybe not the majority, but a good portion of that would be directed at unpaved road maintenance, trying to make sure we got enough lime rock out there and that we're doing a good job dealing with pop.
Commissioner Norfleet, while Commissioner Farnsworth is looking.
On those,
Turn your mic.
on the unimproved roads that's in the city, do y'all have a kind of a taxable revenue base that's coming in off of those roads that people live out there?
Mr. Mayor, we haven't looked at it necessarily in that regards. I would say that for the roads that we know or that we strongly believe to be eligible for CDBG grants, those roads, anything that would qualify for that would be in areas that we deem to be low to moderate income. And so I would say that if they're designated low to moderate income, that they're definitely not properties that are contributing much in the way of tax dollars. Oh, the rural roads, I'm sorry. Again, not a deep analysis, but I would say that, you know, it's my observation that
Conversation when I was in front of the county, Commissioner Hutchinson was arguing that if you chip seal a road, you increase the property values of the road, and
their electric load. They also, their utility rates are higher than ours, and solid waste rates are higher than ours. So they just utilize the other avenues available to them in terms of generating revenues. They have a higher cost to live. They also don't provide some of the services that we have. They don't have a professional planning department. They have a very limited recreation department. Their fire department does not provide the level of service that our fire department does. Just
9 under them in total. You know, imagine the revenue that they get from being twice our size, and their millage rate is only slightly under where we are. So every city's a little bit different, but it is sort of.
Harrison doesn't take into account, well, things like the MSTUs or fire assessments. We added it to our millage rate comparison slide, but then the county has stormwater assessments. Gainesville has stormwater assessments. Gainesville has a very low millage rate at 4.7. They look like the champion, but their utility rates, as you all know, expensive game. The projects that are currently funded in the budget, in the proposed budget, with a millage rate of 5.99 and no change in fire assessment, 5.999 and no change in fire assessment. And about halfway down page 2, you'll see that the downtown parking annex paving is the first project that is unfunded, and then it continues on for another page and a half. As Dallas mentioned, we have a surplus in the proposed budget of about $1,200, and these projects certainly are within the commission's call to say, Mike, we'd prefer you not to do this, or and I'd be very happy to go through each project, or just give the commission a few minutes to look over some and ask questions if they want to know, you know, what's the specific driver behind any of the projects.
Only take just a minute to kind of look through those. And while you're doing that, Mike, I thought the annex parking was funded in last year's budget.
What we funded in last year's budget was nowhere near sufficient to complete the job. Our initial estimates and our evaluation to include that would probably be less than $8,000. So if the commission wants us to find ways to work that in, if that's a priority for the commission, we'd be happy. I know that as we move between now and September, we're going to realize we've been very conservative in our revenue estimates, and trying to find an extra $5,000 or $7,000 between now and September when we begin to come in at about $50,000.
Since Commissioner Coleman's not here, I'll ask about his sign out here. Did I miss it in the funded? Because it was in last year's budget. He graciously took it out. I cannot at this moment remember what for. We had some budget shortfall.
Mr. Mayor, it is an unfunded project, and I believe it's somewhere.
I thought the LEDs was
No,
the actual lights in here. Did we ever, I guess before we think about funding it, did we ever answer the question about
Energies if they want an electric?
The traffic in the distance out there requires
down all the opportunities that are out there?
Sure.
Right now it's not funded anyway, so it's a good time to have a conversation.
Correct. And the other thing that is occurring to staff is also funded in this year's budget. The current year's budget is phase 1 of a space needs analysis for the City Hall downtown facilities. We're looking at the annex, Little Red Schoolhouse, City Hall, in anticipation of at some point, City Hall is going to be expanded. Our current City Hall facility is pushing 30 years. So we believe, we anticipate that that within the next 5 years, the commission is going to be considering some sort of a building program. If that comes sooner, then it might be better to just wrap that sign construction into City Hall expansion rather than build a sign only to find out that we put it a little bit too close.
Yeah.
So that's at least factored in, and then these regulations on LED signs and just sign costs, like everything else we're experiencing, they're significantly higher than they were 3 years ago. Any other questions about projects that are either funded or unfunded?
While you guys are looking, does the public have any questions about funded or unfunded projects?
Jim Stanfield, citizen again. I noticed that Newberry Main Street's got a line item in there. Do we have any other organizations that have a line item in there in our budget?
The commission's budget, we are proposing a line item for local organization sponsorships that funded at $2,500. It allows the commission the latitude, the discretion to fund organizations that would approach them and say, we'd like funding because we provide this service to the city.
Okay. Be careful. Secondly, I noticed on the accomplishments, you talked a little bit about the MSTU, the contract and the money we saved in the MSTU over the years. And I was thinking that maybe y'all ought to look at some of this money that we're saving and possibly put it in a side fund for our own police department. If we're saving that much and we got another year maybe, we might want to take some money, maybe leave our millage rate just a hair higher, and then take any extra money we get, put it into a fund for funding our own police department. Especially seeing as we probably will not continue a contract with Alachua County. And I suspect that we're going to be talking to High Springs an awful lot, but still it would give us a pot of money to be able to use in our transition into whatever we're going to do for law enforcement services. That was it.
Well, Mr. Mayor, that is a great thought, sentiment. We've heard it often. I would say that those savings that we articulated in accomplishments are not savings that the city is realizing as an entity or an organization. Our residents are seeing that in the way of lower tax rates or what their rates would be if we were in the MSTU. So the only way that we would be able to accumulate revenues that we would then utilize for the rollout of a Newberry Police Department moving forward was if we increase one of our revenue sources, such as our tax rate. An example would be when we say that we're saving $750,000 a year, it's by comparing our millage rate currently to what it would be if we lessed out our law enforcement contract. So we drop, currently we're paying about $810,000. We take that off, straight off the top of our current millage rate, and then we add in the current MSTU for law enforcement, which is about 3.7 mils. Multiply that times our property value, and that's how we know our residents are saving that much money. But the city is not receiving those revenues and doing anything with them, and it would take action by the commission to say we want to increase our millage rate and start accumulating those funds so that we can operate Newberry Police Department at some point in the future.
I want to just address Main Street. I'm going to try one more time to articulate this in the way that I think is most accurately true, because to say that in this budget we are funding Main Street $10,000 I think is incorrect. I think we're setting aside $10,000 to hold in abeyance in case we want to hire Main Street to perform tasks, which is what we did in the last year's budget. We did not just give Main Street money. This board doesn't give anybody money. We stopped doing that 6 years ago. We pulled the plug on everybody. So, but we do hire organizations, consulting firms, all kinds, in order to go and do tasks. Now, at this at this moment, with a little bit of jet lag, I don't actually know of any projects in the upcoming year that this board has expressed interest in hiring Main Street to do. I know we want to continue the farmers market, and there may be one of the jobs that didn't make it into last year's budget that come up. But I think what the staff is doing is setting aside the money so that if it is more feasible to pay Main Street to go and perform a task that would cost us staff time or cost us more to hire someone else to do, we have the money set aside to do that. But I don't, again, I object to the concept that this board gives any organization money. We hire people for work. And if we don't like the work, then we won't hire them next time. And if we don't have work, then we won't hire them. But there's no money in here is just a charity. We don't give any money to Meals on Wheels anymore. We don't give any money to Blessed Hope anymore. We don't give any money to Main Street anymore. We just don't give anybody's money away anymore. All right, I'll get off my soapbox now. Go ahead, Mr. Commissioner, any more projects that are funded or unfunded? Commissioner Martin?
Have you guys speculated at all about any kind of a air conditioning and heating savings with regards to trying to get those windows replaced over at the municipal building? Is there any significant? I mean, I see that the windows would be $25,000. We're already doing doors and flooring and painting over there. I'm thinking synergy of getting all the work done at once. I'm thinking if it would reduce the AC bill.
Mr. Mayor, the window and door replacement at the municipal building, actually, that's an error on my part that it's still in there. It's unfunded, but we've discussed this extensively in staff. There's no benefit in terms of air conditioning savings with those existing windows there, and it's a historic building. They need a historic window. They don't function, but we don't utilize them as functioning. Slide
Right.
them up, and so, at a staff level, we're happy for them to be permanently closed glass. They need to be caulked up and they needed to be painted, but not replaced. And so this project was probably just a miscommunication on my part that it continues to be proposed for funding at $25,000. I think we got the zero in the wrong place. We do have some doors at the municipal building that need to be replaced, but I would call that a door replacement, not a window replacement. The project may be, let me look further up
I think
here.
I saw that was in here already.
The municipal building exterior painting was what the project kind of migrated to. Is it funded?
It's the
Municipal
second-
building, yeah, and that's exterior painting. That should take care of the windows.
Maybe the
Typically
door
from-
replacements in the big sheet. Yeah, that's the $3,000.
And I believe that should be, he may have rolled up, there was an interior paint and an exterior trim paint, so I think he rolled them up into one project called painting for the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes,
Is that
because
right?
the 11.5 for those
Two line
combined
items.
painting
That is
is
correct.
there. But the 3,000 in the doors, well, flooring was 7,000 somewhere.
That's
Here it
correct.
is. It's the third item down in the 1920,
That's correct.
which is, yeah, it's in the green there.
Landscape.
So this 3,000
The,
should have been that one that's listed as 25,000 maybe?
correct,
Is that the error?
yes. Like I said,
Okay.
we
Got it.
discussed that, but I just must not have, I was working on one worksheet and not the other, and I just
Yeah.
improperly communicated that.
What is the Little Red Schoolhouse furniture?
Mr. Mayor, we've got essentially programmed into this year's budget, but we've been doing some foundation repair issues and won't complete it. We're doing some interior remodeling. We're moving the planning department downstairs and moving the museum upstairs. They're switching places. Actually, planning department's going over, the building department's currently is, building department's going over to where the museum is, and museum's going upstairs. So in all of those moves, we're going to take that opportunity. I guess we're creating a couple more office space, and there's some furnishings, office equipment and furnishings that go along with that.
Okay.
And Mr. Manager, if we don't get that done soon, Miss Linda is gonna be upset with us.
I
So
understand.
we're gonna have to move on spinning that around.
I understand. We all understand that. It's got a lot of projects underway currently.
I got another question.
Absolutely.
The school bus painting job, I have a little trouble justifying that expense to the general fund for a particular use. Is there any way to recover that from the kids that are actually using it?
Mr. Mayor, we have,
It's
What we're-
$3,500.
what we're thinking, the actual paint job is more than that. The actual paint job is gonna push us closer to $6,000. Okay, well, okay, that's a good point to make, but the actual paint job is more for that. So we have two ways that we plan to pay for those paint jobs. It's probably a 2-year program because we have 2 school buses. But one, we're planning to go out and get at least 50% of the funding through sponsorships. Just ask local businesses if they'd like to have their name somewhere on that bus as contributing to the painting of it. The balance, the $3,500, we're recovering through our lease agreement with Greenfield, who's running the after-school program and the summer programs over there. But we've adjusted the lease payment to collect those revenues.
Okay, so that's actually more of a pass-through, am I hearing that right?
Is that correct?
As part of Greenfield's lease, they pay us to run the bus program,
Okay.
which includes maintenance of the bus.
Okay.
Buses.
Okay.
So we'll pay the 35 up front, but we'll recoup it over time.
We won't, that is
Recoup
correct,
some of
and
it over time.
and the balance, we won't move on the project until we get the other 50% of the funding that we need for the project. And like I said, it's our plan to do this twice for each of the buses so that they are the same. We just aren't proposing to do it in 1 year. We're proposing to do it over 2 or more years.
Okay.
Mike, if we're gonna make the bus look like a NASCAR, can we get Travis a jumpsuit?
That might cost $1,254, but absolutely.
Any other questions, Commissioner Norfleet?
What is the supplemental audit fee?
I think I know the answer to this. You can jump in when I get it wrong. It's good for me to answer some of these, make sure I'm on top of all these programs. We, in addition to the audit that we perform for you, or every year to check the city's finances, we use supplemental audits to make sure that folks that are to provide revenue to us are doing their accounting properly. So we rotate who we perform those supplemental audits on, but if you're a franchise, if you pay electric franchise fees to the city, we have the rights to go in and look at your books for a 3-year period and ensure that you calculated those correctly. The significance of that is shown that when we started negotiating the franchise fee, Clay Electric determined that through an unintended error, they had been underpaying us for utility taxes, and I think we've received a pretty substantial check. Yeah, they were underpaying us to the tune of $70,000 annually. So we utilize a 1 year. The commission asked us to use that to check our contractor that was at Champions. Another year we've used it to check franchise fees with Clay Electric. We can use it for LP gas or natural gas franchise fees. Anybody that have contracts with us, where what they pay us is based on revenue streams. We try to just rotate, maybe be on a 3 to 5 year program where we're just checking them to ensure that we're getting proper payment from them.
Further questions, comments about the project list? What will come up in the next year? Commissioner Norfleet?
On some of these unfunded, items that y'all have on here, have y'all looked at subcontracting it out? Some of the stuff instead of buying new or using personnel or whatever the case is?
Well, yes, sir. I mean, absolutely. We look at subcontracting as a means of saving money where we can. We subcontracted maintenance by use of prison inmate crews to help us with some general maintenance. We subcontract tree removal in the city. We rent equipment. If it's equipment we wouldn't be utilizing on a regular basis, you know, so once or twice a year we need a roller to help us out with some asphalt patching, things like that. And so we try to think of that first, because it's always easier to tell a subcontractor we don't have work rather than an employee that, hey, we don't have work and we're going to have to let you go. I think specifically we could go down through the list and talk about where there's opportunities. I know you have a wealth of experience in ideas in these areas, so if you have some specific ones that we might not have thought of, please bring that to our attention. We'd be happy to give it another look.
Commissioner Barton?
These last couple slides that we haven't gotten to yet, are they going to take up a significant amount of time?
Mr.
You want to
Mayor,
burn through them real quick and then we can come back to this?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
So this slide is simply, you know, kind of coming back full circle to the commission consideration items. We've identified areas for revenue diversification that we can think of. Primarily, there's the taxation on water sales, utility tax on water sales, and for all the years I've been here, there's really been no appetite for that. The commission will consider millage rate preliminarily coming up in July, and then a final millage rate in September. Law enforcement, again, not for this fiscal year, but we've got to begin planning for next fiscal year, and the commission could elect to do that this year. Per Mr. Stainfield's comments, if the commission says, Mike, we'd like to, you know, go ahead and try to build an account with $300,000 to start with law enforcement, then we could come back with the appropriate millage rate that would allow us to get there. We're going to have a law enforcement workshop on July the 29th. That will kind of roll out where we are with potential expenses for fiscal year 21 moving forward. I think we have 5 or 6 different alternatives for the commission to consider. Some continue our current level of service. Some would result in an increased level of service in Newberry, and I guess one alternative would result in a decreased level of service in Newberry. But that's something to be considering. Personnel expenses. You've given us feedback, and that's what we're running with, and unless that changes, we're going to continue with no COLA and an up to 4% merit increases. Capital improvement programs, we've proposed to increase funding on renewal and replacement to $150,000 a year for road resurfacing, and we don't have anything. We've also programmed a little more O&M money in for road maintenance. We don't have anything programmed in for road paving next year. Fire assessment is no proposed change. We welcome your feedback, your thoughts. These are the things that you tell us now, or you can tell us in September as we get ready to finalize all these things about preferences that you have.
Questions about the considerations? Hang on, can you go back one? Is that, Mike, 2 of the options in terms of law enforcement would have budgetary implications for this year, wouldn't they have? If this board chooses to create its own police department or to go with High Springs, and the High Springs negotiations, it's been contemplated that the city of Newberry would buy the vehicles, own the vehicles, those kinds of things. I'm assuming we'd want to be doing that before the final day of the contract with ASO, so we'd want to be purchasing those throughout the year because we're gonna paint them, we're gonna do those types of things.
Mr. Mayor, all of the options potentially have some impact, nothing significant. If we were to do our own police department, we would recommend that we hire a police chief some months ahead of the start of service to help get the department in order, help with the hiring, help with the planning, all those types of things. Contracting with High Springs, probably the biggest impact would be maybe that last month of service with ASO, Alachua County Sheriff's Office, a bit of an overlap so that on October 1, the beginning of a contract period, you don't have brand-new officers that have never been to High Springs and from High Springs that have never been to Newberry and really know what they're on. So we'd see about a 1-month overlap. We've contemplated those. Things like vehicle acquisition, what we're proposing is probably a lease program. We think that we could probably order that type of equipment and still not have a significant budgetary impact to fiscal year 20. It'd mostly be realized in fiscal year 21.
Okay. And when we have the workshop, you'll go into more details about
Absolutely.
those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Okay. Next slide. I saw a comic. I'm ready to get to it. Okay. So we are back. You want to go through the timeline real quick?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. As we've mentioned, a week from today, the commission will be voting on the preliminary fire assessment rate and the preliminary millage rate. There's no proposed change in the preliminary fire assessment, so we'll be bringing back a resolution with the $175. And the preliminary millage rate, staff will be bringing back the simple majority, which will be the 6.3 and change. And then in August, we have the next workshop, which is on your utilities primarily, your proprietary funds. The trim notice will be mailed. This last meeting in August, you'll vote on your final fire assessment rates. Then we'll have our final budget workshop, which will be a wrap-up of the budget. And then starting on September 10th and 27th, you'll have your budget hearings. And the new fiscal year starts in 2.5 months.
Are those dates correct? Because I'm looking at those
Probably
dates.
not.
Okay.
Whatever's on your calendar is probably right.
Just to give you all the confidence in the world and all the information we provided you tonight, the last slide contains errors.
We're just going to go
Where
back
do
to the comic.
Where do you think the error is, Commissioner?
Well, I'm looking at my schedule, particularly for September, and the 27th is a Friday.
I'm going to be at the Newberry High School football game.
Yep, I have homecoming that day, so that'd be very bad.
They were correct for one fiscal year. Probably last fiscal year.
We'll get the
Dallas,
dates
will you
correct.
update that and email?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor and Commissioner, you should have the budget workshops on your calendar already. And
Yeah.
the budget hearing dates are the 9th and the 23rd.
You're right, okay.
July 23rd is on a Tuesday.
September 23rd.
So that'd be September 22nd. Yeah, July 22nd.
We have a regular
Yeah.
city commission meeting on the 23rd.
22nd.
22nd.
On September 23rd, we have a regular.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, September, I'm thinking
Commissioner
July.
So
Martin.
the next budget workshop is August the 7th, Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Mhm.
And then the last budget workshop is August 28th at 6 p.m.
Is that it, Commissioner Hurst?
Should you like?
Yeah.
Should you elect to have it.
Commissioner Martin?
There's 4 items on the funded for fire. They total $61,600. Just for argument's sake, what would that translate into if we paid that through fire assessment?
Are we allowed to pay capital through fire assessment? Okay,
Yes,
I
sir,
always
as
get
long
it
as
with-
it has to do
always
with
mixed up.
fire prevention.
Okay.
Please hold.
So the 4 items are bunker gear, fire hose, the roof, and the paramedic training. I guess the first question is, would they qualify for funding under the assessment.
They
The
would not.
paramedic training would not,
Okay.
but the bunker gear and the fire hose and the re-roof would qualify.
Okay, so that backs it down to 56.6, actually.
I'd have to get our consultant to run the actual numbers. I want to say $25 an assessment raises about 60,000.
That's my memory.
But that was, a year or two ago before we had more housing, so maybe $20 raises $60,000.
Okay, we don't need to necessarily take up everybody's time
Correct.
looking at that, but, I just wanted to know things.
Any other questions, comments about anything presented tonight, not just about the funded and unfunded project list? While the commission's considering, any public questions or comments about tonight's presentation? And Dallas, you said the next, just so I make sure I'm prepared, the next actual budget workshop, we have the 29th is the LEO,
That's correct.
right? We have a commission meeting next Monday,
Correct.
right? And the next budget workshop is August 2nd?
7th.
August 7th.
Wednesday, August
Okay,
7th.
Wednesday, August 7th. And that budget workshop will focus on
Enterprise fund.
enterprise funds. Okay. Commission come up with any other questions, comments, concerns? Commissioner Martin?
Among the four of us, before I even start looking at unfunded items that could be offset by increasing the fire assessment by 25, is there even any appetite among the four of us to bother even going down that road?
Not from me.
I'm a believer of pay-as-you-go via, services using it, so I would be at least interested in exploring that option.
My opinion is, if you're gonna increase the assessment fees, I need to see it cut somewhere else. If you're gonna raise the, millage rates, I wanna see it cut somewhere else as well.
In the past, when we've increased the fire assessment, we've cut the same amount out of the millage. So, I think what Commissioner Martin is proposing for consideration is making sure that the people who utilize that are the ones that are paying that. And then we haven't got to the flip side of cutting it out of the millage yet. And I guess my only question about that would go to Jim's comment, which I do think we'll have a better understanding of where we're headed, I think, after the law enforcement workshop, but I think there are gonna be financial considerations. I don't know if there's another way that we can set aside money to address those potential financial considerations for law enforcement other than millage. Millage is certainly the easiest one to give yourself some breathing room there. And then, of course, we still have the countryway drainage issue that is a big ticket that's looming out there. So those would be the two things. I'm always a proponent, I think, as Commissioner Hersham said, of making sure that people who are getting the service are the ones that are paying for the service. So I think it's an interesting idea to maybe bring back at the next budget workshop, or when would be an appropriate, and that's proprietary funds, or enterprise funds.
Well, the commission will need to decide if it's interested on Monday. Because once you set the preliminary rate for fire assessment and millage on Monday,
Will you have an answer for us by Monday about what that would, I think you're about right. I think it's gonna probably be between 20 and 25. That would take the fire assessment to 200.
it's 175 now, so I guess.
So I would take it, so you could set the preliminary at 200. That would buy us time to have this conversation.
And I should be able to have the numbers for you on Monday. They can get those pretty quickly.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts, considerations, Commissioner Norfleet?
On the preliminary that you gotta set by Monday, Why is that? Just walk me through it.
The state statute requires that we set our preliminary millage rates and tax rate, assessment rates by August 1st. So Monday's your last commission meeting before that deadline, because we have to give enough notice to the property appraiser so that they can begin printing the truth and millage notices that get mailed out in August to all of your residents.
And the trick is, whatever you say on Monday, you can't go higher than that. You can always go lower than that. So what Mike was talking about, setting a grace period, he's gonna recommend that you set the millage rate at 6.3 as a preliminary, not a recommendation, that's what you actually adopt. But if the sky were to fall on Tuesday, whatever you say on Monday, you're locked in, you can't go beyond that. So that's kind of, you tie your hands on Monday with whatever you say at the preliminary.
How much discussion has been prior to the deadline of setting this?
All the 2 workshops that we've had so far have been so that what we had tonight was our conversation. The first one, which was we didn't quite have the numbers on our property values, was the conversation, and then the meetings that staff had with each individual commissioner working up towards the workshops is when we
Mr.
talk
Mayor,
about.
State law prescribes a pretty tight calendar for budget. So the property appraiser has to certify to us our taxable values on July 1st, and we have to certify back to the property appraiser by August 1st what we're going to do with our preliminary millage rates. It's all prescribed in the state statute.
Any further questions? And Dice, any further questions? Comments, thoughts? Public have any questions, comments, thoughts? Hearing none, we are adjourned.